Paris Air Show, June 3, 1973. Le Bourget Airport. The summer sky was clear but heavy, a humid blue curtain over the world's most powerful stage for aviation glory. Beneath it, a silver dart of steel and titanium streaked across the horizon, faster, sharper, angrier than anything the crowd had ever seen. Its engines screamed above the thunder of applause. Soviet banners rippled in the wind. The Tupolev Tu-144, Concorde to its western rivals, was flying. At 2,000 feet, sunlight shimmered across its needle nose, its four engines roaring as if tearing open the air itself. For a moment it seemed invincible. Then, in front of 250,000 horrified spectators, the unthinkable happened. The aircraft banked too hard, pitched upward, stalled, and within seconds disintegrated mid-air. Flaming debris rained down upon the quiet French village of Goussainville. 15 homes burned. 6 crewmen died instantly. A nation's pride turned to smoke and silence. Le Bourget Eyewitness Report, June 1973. In the VIP box, Alexei Tupolev, son of the legendary aircraft designer Andrei Tupolev, stood frozen. The same man whose name had once been synonymous with Soviet aviation brilliance now watched his creation fall from the sky. Engineers, generals, diplomats all stared in disbelief. It was more than a crash. It was a symbol, a streak of ambition, arrogance, and secrecy burned into the ground. Soviet Aeronautical Bureau Archives, 1974. But to understand how the Soviet Union reached that day, how it beat the West to the sound barrier in commercial flight, only to fall before the applause had faded, we must go back to the height of the Cold War. In 1960, Nikita Khrushchev received intelligence that Britain and France were joining forces to create a new kind of aircraft, one that could fly passengers at supersonic speeds, reducing transatlantic flight times from 8 hours to 3. To Khrushchev, it was more than an aircraft. It was a statement of global supremacy. The USSR had already shocked the West with Sputnik, with Gagarin, with the R-7 rocket that had shaken the stratosphere. Now the West was threatening to win the race for the skies. The order came down from Moscow with characteristic bluntness. We will build one faster. And first. Council of Ministers Directive Number 568, July 1960. The project was assigned to the Tupolev Design Bureau, the empire of engineers that had given the Soviet Union its bombers, transports and spy aircraft for decades. Leading the effort was Alexei Tupolev himself, a man who grew up in hangars and drafting rooms, who had studied every rivet of his father's designs. He would not merely match the Concorde, he would surpass it. Within months, the design board at Zhukovsky was filled with blueprints. Engineers worked 16-hour days, their pencils moving faster than the machines that would one day shape their metal. They had no choice. The Kremlin expected the first prototype to fly within 8 years, half the time of the Anglo-French effort. The party does not wait for engineers, one factory director reminded his exhausted workers. Plant log, Kazan Aviation Complex, 1964. What began as a race soon became an obsession. Soviet aviation was already stretched. The nation's resources were funneled into rockets, tanks, and submarines. But prestige outweighed practicality. The Tu-144 would be both a civil airliner and a weapon of pride. For the first time, Moscow's propaganda machine would compete not in missiles, but in elegance, in a gleaming white bird that would outfly capitalism itself. By 1965, the sketches were becoming metal. Sheets of heat-resistant titanium alloy were tested under torchlight. The exhaust nozzles of the new Kuznetsov NK-144 engines glowed red in night trials outside Moscow. The plane's projected speed, Mach 215, 1,130 miles per hour, faster than a rifle bullet, longer than the Concorde by 12 feet. Its slender delta wings gave it the shape of an arrow, its fuselage the proportions of a predator. It would carry 120 passengers at twice the speed of sound, at altitudes above 60,000 feet. From Moscow to Khabarovsk in 3 hours, to New York in 5. Design Bureau Specifications, 1966. Yet beneath the smooth metal, problems multiplied. The brakes warped under heat. The landing gear collapsed during test rolls. Soviet tires made of synthetic rubber shredded under pressure. Engineers added wheels and 12 under each wing, making it heavier and more unwieldy. To compensate, they added canards, small forward wings that gave lift at low speeds. Elegant to the eye but aerodynamically complex, demanding precision no Soviet airfield could guarantee. Still, the deadlines loomed. Every engineer knew what was at stake. In the USSR, failure in such a project wasn't just professional, it was political. Test reports were softened, results exaggerated. The Communist Party newspaper Pravda was already printing stories about the Soviet superplane that would soon connect Moscow and Havana in mere hours. The myth had to stay ahead of reality. Pravda, Okty, 1968. Then, on December 31st, 1968, the impossible happened. In the freezing dawn at Zhukovsky Airfield, a sleek white shape emerged from the fog. Snow drifted over its wings as ground crews cleared ice from its tail. The engines ignited, 4 thunderclaps rolling across the plane. As the Tu-144 lifted off for its maiden flight, Soviet engineers shouted, cried, and embraced. Above them, for the first time, a commercial aircraft had broken the sound barrier. The Concorde was still on the ground in Toulouse. The USSR had won, by 3 months. Flight test log number 01, Tupolev Bureau, Deck 1968. For a moment, the world believed the myth. Western reporters were stunned. French President Georges Pompidou called the aircraft a triumph of form. Even the British press, usually scathing toward Soviet technology, conceded that Moscow's jet age has arrived. The Times, Jan 1969. But inside the Soviet program, celebration turned to anxiety. The aircraft that dazzled crowds could barely land without overheating its brakes. Its engines gulped fuel at rates that made long-distance routes nearly impossible. The promised economic miracle was turning into an engineering nightmare. Engineers warned that the engine's afterburners, essential for maintaining supersonic speed, would deafen passengers and destroy efficiency. Yet orders came down again. Proceed to production. When the Tu-144 debuted at the 1971 Paris Air Show, it was not just a plane. It was a message. Painted in pearl white, red star gleaming, it taxied beside its Western rival, the Concorde. Western journalists mocked it as Concordski, but the crowds were awed. Soviet test pilot Mikhail Kozlov smirked at the British delegation and whispered, "Just wait until you see us fly." Le Bourget Press Transcript, 1971. 2 years later, Kozlov's boast would haunt him. June 3, 1973. The Tu-144 screamed past the grandstands once more, banking hard, climbing steep. The Concorde's earlier demonstration had been elegant, reserved, disciplined. But the Soviets wanted drama. As the Tu-144 leveled off, a Mirage fighter appeared briefly nearby, perhaps photographing, perhaps provoking. Kozlov pulled up sharply. The engines roared to full thrust. Seconds later, the wings tore apart under stress. The sky turned to flame. Witnesses said it sounded like thunder, and as the wreckage smoldered in the fields of France, the dream of Soviet supersonic glory died with it. Yet even then, in Moscow's shadowed offices, a new order circulated through the Tupolev. Bureau, the directive was simple. The party demands correction. The engineers were told to fix the unfixable and to fly again. In the aftermath of Le Bourget, the wreckage of the Tu-144 was gathered piece by piece from the charred soil of Goussainville. French and Soviet investigators examined twisted fragments of titanium and scorched wiring beneath a summer drizzle. The French wanted answers. The Soviets wanted silence. Officially, it was an unfortunate accident due to pilot error. Unofficially, the Kremlin's message to Tupolev engineers was clear: rebuild, faster, and stronger. The dream of a supersonic airliner could not die in foreign fields. Intergovernmental Accident Inquiry, June 1973. Within weeks, Soviet technicians at Zhukovsky began redesigning the Tu-144 from its skeleton outward. They thickened the wings, reinforced the fuselage, modified the canards for better stability at low speeds. The NK-144 engines, massive fuel-hungry beasts, were redesigned by the Kuznetsov Design Bureau under Chief Engineer Nikolai Kuznetsov himself. He had built engines for nuclear bombers, not passenger planes, but now the state demanded silence, efficiency, and perfection. "You will make the sky safe for the motherland," his directive read. Design Bureau Memorandum, July 1973. The engineers at Kazan Aviation Plant No. 22 were tasked with translating ambition into metal. They replaced portions of the airframe with heat-resistant alloys, VD-17 aluminum and titanium composites capable of withstanding 120 degrees skin temperatures at Mach 2. The fuel system was recalibrated to manage the brutal thermal expansion inside the tanks. Miles of wiring were rerouted through fireproof conduits, but each fix added weight, and every kilogram made the aircraft thirstier. Still, the design evolved. The Tu-144D variant emerged, a supposed leap forward. Its new engines, the Kolesov RD-3651A turbojets, produced 44,000 pounds of thrust each. The plane could climb to 65,000 feet, cruising at 1,350 mph. It was a technical marvel and a mechanical paradox. To achieve supersonic speed, it needed afterburners burning 1.5 tons of kerosene per minute. To land safely, it required massive drag chutes and reinforced landing gear. Engineers joked that she flies like a rocket and lands like a brick. Technical Manual TM-144-32, 1974. Yet in Soviet propaganda reels, the Tu-144D gleamed as a triumph. Newsreels showed it slicing through the clouds, passengers smiling beneath red banners. In truth, those passengers were test engineers wearing padded helmets, not tourists. Each flight was a gamble. Cabin depressurizations were frequent. Warning sirens blared mid-air, and even the flight attendants were trained technicians. Aeroflot Safety Review, 1975. Despite the fears, Aeroflot prepared to launch public service. On December 26, 1975, the Tu-144 carried its first official payload. Not passengers, but mail. Moscow to Alma-Ata, Kazakhstan. 2,000 miles of Siberian winter sky. The Soviet press proclaimed it a new dawn of global aviation. But inside the control tower, the Tu-144 landed with one engine on fire and brakes smoking red. Aeroflot Flight Log 5101, Deck 1975. Still, the party demanded more. Passenger service would begin, ready or not. On November 1, 1977, Aeroflot Flight 499 took off from Moscow's Domodedovo Airport with 70 passengers aboard. Each seat was filled by hand-picked citizens, engineers, bureaucrats, party members. Cameras rolled. Champagne was poured. The Tu-144 climbed above the clouds, its nose drooping mechanically for visibility, then rising again for speed. At 50,000 feet, the passengers felt the tremor of the engines as afterburners ignited. Conversation died instantly. The roar was deafening, a metallic storm inside the cabin. Windows vibrated, trays rattled loose. The dream of luxury flight became a trial of endurance. Aeroflot Service Report 1977. From outside, the Tu-144 was breathtaking, sleek, white, arrow-like, its delta wings slicing across frozen light. Inside, it was chaos. Ceiling panels shook, cabin temperature fluctuated wildly, and the air conditioning system, overstressed by heat from the engines, spewed burning fumes. Passengers passed notes, because voices could not carry over the mechanical scream. Soviet television never aired the true recordings. But one engineer's diary later revealed, it felt like riding inside a missile. Flight Engineers Journal, Deck 1977, the Western press, ever watchful, noted the difference between Concorde and its Soviet twin. The Anglo-French Concorde, with its Olympus 593 engines built by Rolls-Royce and Snecma, could cruise supersonically without constant afterburner use, its precision engineering allowing for sustained Mach 2 efficiency. The Tu-144, by contrast, guzzled fuel, overheated its hydraulics, and strained its fuselage under vibration. Concorde's skin was crafted from British-developed hydruminium alloys, optimized for elasticity. The Soviet materials, though rugged, expanded unevenly, requiring constant manual trim correction. U.S. Strategic Air Intelligence Summary, 1978. But the Soviets persisted, their pride outweighing practicality. In Alma-Ata, the Tu-144's arrival was celebrated like a moon landing. Children waved flags as the plane touched down, engines screaming, heat shimmer rippling across the tarmac. Yet even as it taxied, engineers whispered of failures, leaks in hydraulic lines, overheating avionics, hairline fractures in the fuselage. Within a year, the program had recorded over 200 technical anomalies across fewer than 100 flights. State Aviation Report 1978. And then came the second disaster. May 23, 1978. Flight 771 Moscow to Alma-Ata. 30 minutes after takeoff, cruising at 36,000 feet, passengers noticed smoke drifting through the cabin. A fuel line in the left wing had ruptured near the engine nacelle. Flames spread into the control cables. The pilots, Vladimir Molchanov and Boris Pervukin, declared an emergency. With remarkable composure, they managed to descend and land the burning jet at Yegorevsk, 30 miles from Moscow. But by then, the fire had consumed half the wing. The aircraft skidded off the runway, collapsing onto its side. 2 crewmen were killed. The rest barely escaped. Moscow Aviation Incident Dossier, May 1978. It was the final blow. Within hours, the Ministry of Aviation grounded all Tu-144s indefinitely. Aeroflot's weekly supersonic service was cancelled. The official statement blamed operational re-evaluation, but the truth was clearer. The Soviet supersonic dream had become a liability. The engineers at Tupolev's bureau fought to salvage the design. They tested new configurations, titanium-reinforced fuselages, more efficient engines, even hybrid turbine ramjet concepts. But none could overcome the plane's fundamental flaw. Its speed came at the expense of everything else. "We built a weapon that pretended to be an airliner," one designer later confessed in an interview decades later. Design Bureau Oral History Project 1994. The irony was cruel. The Soviets had achieved the impossible first. On December 31, 1968, the Tu-144 had flown supersonically before any Western airliner. Yet victory in speed had blinded its creators to the realities of flight economics, maintenance, and human comfort. Its engines were too thirsty, its materials too crude, and its systems too fragile for sustained civilian use. By late 1978, the Tu-144 fleet sat grounded on frozen airfields, their once polished bodies streaked with rust and oil. Engineers walked among them like mourners in a cemetery of steel. Each plane represented millions of rubles, tens of thousands of labor hours, and a piece of national identity. To dismantle them was unthinkable, but so was flying them again. And yet the story did not end there. In 1979, the Soviet government quietly handed 2 airframes to the Moscow Aviation Institute for experimental research. One would test high-altitude aerodynamics. Another would become a flying laboratory for the Buran space shuttle program. Even in failure, the Tu-144's ghost lingered, its speed, its elegance, its tragedy, fueling future dreams. Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute Report 1980. Still, deep within the hangars, amid the smell of kerosene and cold metal, an unspoken truth haunted the engineers. They had built history's first supersonic passenger jet. They had beaten the West to Mach 2, but what they had not built, what they could not build, was endurance. As the last Tu-144's engines cooled, a technician scratched 4 words into its landing gear bay. Words later found decades after the USSR's collapse. Быстрее всех. Недолго. Faster than all. Not for long. When the Tu-144 program was finally suspended in 1978, it was not announced with ceremony or mourning. There were no parades, no memorials, no official statements broadcast on Radio Moscow. The aircraft simply vanished. Hangar doors closed, production lines fell silent, and the skies over Zhukovsky, once ripped apart by the sound of supersonic thunder, returned to stillness. The Soviet dream of commercial supersonic flight was sealed behind classified reports and stamped folders. The engineers were reassigned to cargo planes and military bombers, the heroes of a forgotten race. Soviet Council on Civil Aviation Report 1979. But the story of the Tu-144 did not die quietly. It became a phantom within Soviet engineering culture, both a cautionary tale and a symbol of daring ambition. The plane had been a triumph of speed, yes, but its failure exposed something deeper: the limits of state-driven perfection, the dangers of pride disguised as progress. As one retired test pilot wrote years later, the Tu-144 taught us not about flight, but about the weight of orders. Pilot Memoir, Moscow Air Institute Archives. Even as its charred reputation lingered, the aircraft's impact was undeniable. The Soviet aerospace industry learned lessons written in jet fuel and blood. New alloys were developed to survive Mach 2 stress temperatures. Avionics wiring standards were overhauled. The study of aerodynamics at high Mach cruise altitudes matured into a science of heat management and vibration control. When the Buran space shuttle glided back to Earth a decade later, its heat shield, structural composition and control systems owed more to the Tu-144 than to any Western influence. Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute Journal, 1983. And yet, for all its technical inheritance, the Tu-144's greatest legacy was psychological. The loss of the Concorde marked the end of a certain Soviet bravado. The belief that any Western feat could be matched, even surpassed, through sheer will. The engineers of the 1980s worked quieter, more cautious, their designs shaped by data, not directives. In the 1960s, one veteran engineer confessed, we built from dreams. In the 1980s, we built from fear. Tupolev Design Bureau Oral History, 1991. Across the Iron Curtain, the contrast was stark. The Anglo-French Concorde entered service triumphantly in 1976, carving a slender white arc across Atlantic skies. Air France and British Airways offered the elite a taste of tomorrow. Paris to New York in just 3.5 hours. It was a technological victory, but also a narrow one. Only 20 Concordes were ever built, each an engineering jewel too costly to replicate. The aircraft's Olympus 593 engines, more refined and efficient than the Tu-144's, still drank fuel with insatiable thirst. Supersonic flight, it turned out, was a victory of image, not economy. Kyiv Strategic Air Transport Review, 1982. While the West celebrated, Soviet planners watched from afar. They could not deny that they had flown first. December 31, 1968, 3 months before Concorde's maiden flight, would remain a permanent line in the record books. For the USSR, it was proof that its scientists and factories could match the West stride for stride, even if their creation fell from the sky. We lost the race for longevity, said engineer Ilya Grinberg decades later, but not for courage. Aviation Heritage Interview, 2005. The psychological wound, however, ran deep. Within the Soviet Air Force and Aeroflot alike, whispers began to circulate. The engineers had gone too far, too fast. Some claimed that espionage had cursed the project, that stolen blueprints of Concorde, obtained through Cold War spy channels, had been incomplete or even deliberately sabotaged. Others believed the tragedy lay not in the design, but in the politics that forced its timeline. Whatever the cause, the result was irreversible. Public trust in Soviet civil aviation's safety record was shaken, perhaps fatally. State Aviation Inquiry Summary, 1980. And then there were the people, the silent army who built it. The machinists in Kazan who shaped titanium ribs with worn tools. The test engineers at Zhukovsky who sat behind thick glass listening for the frequency hum of engines near failure. The metallurgists who slept in their labs, their breath frosting the windows, testing alloys by hand because computers were scarce. They were the invisible hands of the Tu-144, workers whose fingerprints still rest on the steel bones of a fallen dream. Factory labor record number 442, 1972. Many of them never flew in their creation. To them, the Tu-144 was not a plane, but a promise that Soviet science could touch the horizon first. And for a moment it did, but by 1979, most of these men and women had been reassigned. Their workshops converted to bomber programs, their drawings filed away. In the West, engineers retired with pensions and applause. In the East, they were given new projects and silence, yet the plane itself refused to fade. In the late 1980s, NASA and the Soviet Space Agency revisited the Tu-144D. Stripped of its Aeroflot livery, repainted in blue and white, the old jet became the Tu-144L, a flying laboratory. Western pilots sat beside Russian engineers, testing high-speed aerodynamics for the next generation of spaceplanes. The irony was unmistakable. The aircraft that had once symbolized rivalry now embodied cooperation. Its engines roared again, not as a weapon of propaganda but as a teacher of science. NASA Technical Memorandum TM 4799, 1998. Still, no amount of research could erase the ghosts of Le Bourget. For those who had witnessed the 1973 crash, the fireball, the plummeting debris, the stunned silence of 250,000 spectators, the memory endured. French villagers still spoke of the explosion as Le tonnerre soviétique, the Soviet thunder. A sonic boom that left a crater not just in the Earth, but in the history of aviation itself. Eyewitness Oral Archive, Musée de l'Air et de l'Espace. Tenet 1. When the Concorde itself fell from the sky in July 2000, bursting into flames just 9 miles from where the Tu-144 had crashed, the symmetry was haunting. A piece of metal on the runway had punctured its fuel tank, igniting the jet in seconds. 113 people perished. The world mourned, not just for the passengers but for the end of an era. 2 nations had chased the same dream, and both had paid the same price. French Accident Investigation Bureau Report, 2001. After the Concorde's retirement in 2003, supersonic passenger travel vanished entirely from the skies. For the first time in half a century, humanity flew slower than it once had. Yet in that silence, something remarkable endured. The realization that the Tu-144 and Concorde had not failed in vain. Their legacy lived in the mathematics of stealth fighters, in the alloys of hypersonic missiles, in the cabin pressurization systems of modern airliners. They had taught engineers how to dance with the limits of physics and survive. Aerospace Materials Research Council Report 2005. In post-Soviet Russia, the surviving Tu-144s stand like frozen swans in desolate airfields. Their white paint has yellowed. Their wings collect snow. Tourists take photographs beside them, unaware that they are standing before a monument to a vanished kind of courage, the courage to build faster than reason, to reach beyond the map of safety. Inside their cockpits, the dials are still labeled in Cyrillic, the switches stiff with time. One placard reads, "Не открывать при полете," do not open in flight, a warning and perhaps a metaphor. And so the story of the Tu-144 ends as it began, not in triumph or defeat, but in awe. It was a machine born from rivalry, forged in secrecy, and destroyed by its own momentum. It flew higher, faster and earlier than its Western rival, but it could not outlast the laws of physics or the weight of politics. Alexei Tupolev himself, reflecting late in life, is said to have whispered during an interview, "We chased the sound of the future, but the future wasn't ready for the sound." The Tu-144 remains a paradox, the first supersonic passenger jet and one of aviation's greatest failures. Yet in its failure lies the most enduring truth of the 20th century, that in the race for speed, the real victory belongs not to those who arrive first, but to those who endure the journey. In the end, both East and West learned the same lesson, one written in smoke over Paris and repeated in flame 3 decades later. In modern flight, as in war, speed is power, but endurance is survival.